Hello, my name is Kevin Fisher. I'm with AVAC. I'm the policy director, and I'm here with two, what I call the leading lights of community engagement and advocacy around HIV vaccines. And we're here to discuss vaccines at CROI in 2016. And I'm going to introduce these two gentlemen first, and then we'll sort of talk about some of the things at the conference and some of the things outside of the conference that you can look forward in the next year. So first we have Steve Wakefield, known as Wakefield, from the HVTN. He's the external, I think the chief external officer, is that right? So he deals with the entire, he has the global, the world is his mandate, so outside of the VTN. And then we also have Natando Yola, who has been at the Desmond Tutu HIV Foundation for almost a decade, I think, and is certainly one of our...
Yeah, more than a decade.
Yeah, he's one of the most knowledgeable people you will ever meet about community engagement around. Well, I can say that. I believe that to be the case too. He can't say that, but I can say that, and so it's a real treat, I think, for you. So I'm going to talk a little bit about. I'm going to begin by talking a little bit about CROI. This year doesn't have a lot of traditional vaccine presentations, so that and unlike past years, we don't have a plenary. And there aren't really any sessions on vaccines. There are some posters, but vaccines really kind of thread through a lot of the different presentations, a lot of the background. And so we're going to talk a little bit about what things are going on in vaccines and how they might affect the other things in CROI and how they might affect next year's CROI. And so we're going to start a little bit with, and I was going to talk. I think the two presentations which you should look at if you're interested in vaccines are, one is Bruce Walker's talk the first night, the immunology lecture that he gave that sort of explored what we know about T cells, which is one of the immune responses that a vaccine could induce, and how T cells might help with antibody responses, and also how T cells might help on a therapeutic basis. So that's a really interesting presentation. And then also importantly, John Mascola's presentation on neutralizing antibodies, and Steve Wakefield's going to talk a little bit about the AMP trial. And so I'm going to actually just turn it over to Wakefield now. Maybe if you could sort of talk a little bit about the VTNs involved in both trials under the P5 and also under the AMP trial, and maybe talk a little bit about that work that's going on with there.
Thanks, Kevin. You know what's exciting is an important piece of vaccine history and work is the fact that we did have the Thai trial where there was a result where people were actually protected. So we've spent the vaccine field time building on that trial, and people forget that right now there's 10 studies still out there in the field out of the almost 70 studies that the HIV Vaccine Trials Network has done that are continuing to build on that platform so that we can improve and actually have a level of result and a level of protection that we could actually deploy out in the field. So what's exciting right now is that by the end of this year, there'll be a number of new studies open across Southern Africa that in a number of countries that haven't had HIV vaccine trials before, taking a look at different ways to build on that P5, on that Thai trial result, adding new proteins, adding new ways of administering vaccines, and making sure we get forward progress.
That's great. That's great. So do you have a kind of a rough schedule when I know that there's some trials are going on now, and
actually many of them, many of the sites that are in Southern Africa are going to participate also in the very exciting AMP study, which was highlighted in John Mascola's presentation. What John Mascola did for me was highlight the fact that antibody-mediated prevention is the next holy grail. And what this is individuals are going to be given antibodies that are broadly neutralizing around a lot of different types of HIV, and they're going to come in and they're going to have them infused. And rather than wait for a vaccine where the body learns how to protect itself and builds the antibodies, we're going to actually just take the antibodies and put them into individuals and figure out how much antibody do we need for protection and how do we make that protection robust so that as we have new vaccines, we know which ones to move forward with and which ones are going to make a big difference for folks. So those studies are opening as in the next couple of months, as a matter of fact, before mid-year. And by the end of the year, we will add on additional vaccine studies that are already in phase 1 in the US, but will expand across the globe to our partners.
So can you talk a little bit about what infusion might mean?
Sure, an infusion is a methodology that's been used to help control other diseases all along, but we're going to take the antibodies, and for people who think of a vaccine, you think of getting a jab in the arm. An infusion, you actually will have a bag of fluid where a person will sit for a half hour to an hour and allow the fluid to actually move slowly into their system and become part of what they take with them because of the volume of liquid that a person needs to get the antibodies on board. And what we've learned about these antibodies in the early studies and the safety studies is that they not only are safe and tolerable, but they're on board for about 2 months. And so people will come back every 2 months for a new infusion, and we'll be able to figure out what are the right levels to move forward with. And that will train us on how to make vaccines that are more effective.
Great, thank you. And Natando, maybe, I know that you're involved with the P5, the community engagement around P5. Can you talk a little bit about what plans there are to engage communities and prepare communities for these trials and your thoughts about, and I know you also worked on the Janssen trial, which I'll also talk about a little bit later, but why don't we just talk about the P5 and what's going on in South Africa?
So yeah, I mean, I think, and I mean, in a South African context, there's really, it seems more like there's, we are in some track field, and there are a lot of these products that are racing, you know, against each other in a way, and of course, for the right reasons that we know that we really need something that will really work for the communities and for the different varied populations that are in South Africa. So, you know, and over time, it's like, you know, we've had vaccines, you know, being the ultimate thing that communities are expecting in a way as you know, where their hopes are pinned in terms of finding something that will prevent HIV. And of course came PrEP, came microbicides, and, you know, and really that is how they are seen from a community's point of view, because all we talk about really is about what is it that is coming, and, you know, what is it that, you know, we sort of, in fact, by doing that, we sort of have communities pin their hopes in each of these different modalities. So having, you know, heard about PrEP and how far it's moving, and now microbicides, and I think from a community as point of view, we still sort of really looking at vaccines and sort of, you know, waiting to hear how far is this really gonna move. And if we talk then, to come to your question about community engagement and preparing communities, you really not looking at it from only a vaccine, HIV vaccines point of view, but from across, you know, the different options that are out in the field. But of course, very, very important again that as it seemed like the others have sort of, you know, run to the front and behind the vaccines, you know, through the P5 are coming behind, we should then sort of relook and go back to the communities and still say, you know, having done everything, we still have vaccines coming, and our hope really, ultimately, at the end of it all, you know, to end the epidemic will be to have a vaccine. So the message basically is really like that from a community's point of view, and with all of the work that, you know, Wakefield has shared in terms of what is upcoming, it's an opportunity to go back in a way to basics. You know, from where we have been in 2005 when we were doing the STEP trial, you know, and really, because I think, and really talk seriously about, again, what it is, where we are, and what then is what is P5, what are vaccines, what does it mean, what does RV144 mean, and really a lot of work is happening in terms of really trying to visit those sort of basic messages around HIV vaccine research. Yeah.
So if I could just turn back to the P5 for just a second. My understanding is an HVTN 100 is looking at different immune responses, and that based on that will maybe a decision about whether there's going to be an efficacy trial, which could occur in 2017. Is that correct? Or?
Actually, a decision should be able to be made right in 2016.
Great.
What's exciting about that is, we have taken the technology that was available in the Thai trial, and we've actually re-engineered it so that it more closely matches the vaccines that or the virus that is in Africa. And we've removed all doubt from our, in terms of a scientific process, that we have a safe product that we can now move forward. And we're looking to see if the immune responses that are there give us a signal and say, yes, this makes sense to continue going forward. Yes, it makes sense to boost individuals with certain proteins. And while we've been doing that, the Thai folks have gone back and provided a boost to the folks in Thailand. So we'll have a lot of data to make good, clear decisions on which vaccines to focus on.
That's great, and maybe we'll learn more about that at in the next CROI. And I guess I wanted to also just in the HIV, I mean, at AVAC we're HIV vaccine advocates, and we cherish the efficacy trials that we get, and they don't come along where we're sometimes like a child with one cookie, but this time we actually might have two cookies, because there's also plans. Janssen and Crucell are also planning and looking at a trial in a pox virus Ad26 with a protein boost, and they're right now they're undergoing trials which will looking at another possible efficacy trial also in possibly in Southern Africa and East Africa. Do you have something to say about that?
Yeah, what's exciting about that for me is we actually are looking at not just doing that in Southern Africa, but we will actually start work with that this year in the U.S. And so the U.S. Sites will have a chance in just a few weeks to begin to enroll folks in taking a look at some of these vaccines that are built on a really kind of a different platform that's a mosaic. It looks across the board at different way. It looks at the virus in a way that will be able to approach a whole variety of types of HIV.
So the mosaic is such an interesting idea, and I've heard it sort of described as kind of a greatest hits, which is that it looks at what is created immune responses in a lot of different clades. So it's attractive for in a clade B, for example, epidemic, because it has a bit of clade B. So there's a possibility that it could be a global vaccine. If it might not be, but that's at least one of their hopes. Is it?
And that's actually really exciting, because I think that what we'll find is that at the end of the day, if you have a vaccine that is global, it will be much easier to ensure that folks aren't worried just about how do we make this available in low and middle income countries, but how do we make it available globally, and how do we ensure there's enough product for everyone.
So, Natando, I was going to ask you, I don't know if you've done any work around the Janssen. I mean, I don't know if you've been involved in, if they've started community engagement around it.
So there is, I think, I can remember two, trials that are happening, at least in South Africa, on the Janssen products, and I mean, which I think, again, taking from what Wakefie is telling us, that this is sort of an exciting approach and bringing sort of a different kind of approach into the whole hope of vaccines, bringing many vaccine, options. So, and again, community engagement really is not, if we talk about vaccines, it's really not about the name of the product. It's really about a vaccine, and that's all it is. And so that when we engage with communities, and of course it's important to to understand all the other fundamental science approaches into all of this work. But I think ultimately, it comes to the fact that we really need to mobilize communities to support all of this science, to find a vaccine that is really going to work. And I think that is the interest at a community level in terms of all of this work.
So could you talk a little bit, I mean, you've had a lot of experience doing community engagement around vaccine trials and prevention trials. Can you talk a little bit about how is it different from 10 years ago, and how do you think it's going to be changing in the future? Like, what is the nature of the way we engage communities around prevention trials changing, and what are there new tools that we have that to make sure that communities are engaged, and really, so we can talk a little bit about the future. And
so I mean, yeah, we've really come a long way, from since 2007, where we had something coming, and was then it was more like the promise got cut off in terms of the Pambili study, and I must say that from there, probably there was a little bit of refocusing into what also seems to be promising better than what Pambili was actually telling us. So the focus a little bit shifted into the ARV-based prevention research. But I think along the line, as I was saying, we have seen vaccines coming up, and that has really challenged us to reorganize and really think about how, remember how we did it, and go back into those basics of explaining the science of vaccinology in a way that communities are able to understand it. And I think that, from a community's point of view, I think the difficulty is really trying to bring all of this science, because for them, again, it's really about what is promising to be working and what is the next promising thing. But I think most importantly, we continue to be betterly organized in terms of how, as a country, we really don't focus into, one modality, but really focus into the science of HIV prevention. And I think the approaches of community engagement are really more from that point of view. But of course, vaccines are very important, and vaccines, is what we have learned from any other, history of diseases, that eventually what we need is a vaccine.
Well, it's very exciting that communities are engaging on that level on the scientific, and I know that BTN has done a lot of work in making sure that the communities really, there are opportunities for communities to really understand the science, and I think that's a really important thing. Maybe you could talk a little bit about GPP just for a second, if you would, just like what GPP is and how that's being used.
Yes. I mean, I think alongside all the efforts that are really happening, because you have a trial that's, for instance, that is happening at a community level, where you have a trial site doing community involvement and mobilizing communities to take part and support trials, and you realize that they are largely driven according to who is conducting the trial. And I think GPP really came and told us that actually, the message sort of standardized the way of engaging with communities, and really said, what you have been doing and what you are doing is really great, but can we then find a way of really standardizing engagement of various stakeholders at a community level and other broader levels. For instance, in a South African context, within a province, you have stakeholders that speak to each other from province to province, and then they sort of, through the good participatory practice guidelines, get to be brought into this, in all these developments. And I think GPP is really one guidance that has really been able to sort of combine what is happening at a very basic community level to other broader levels, and bringing stakeholders and have them together in terms of engaging within these trials.
Thank you. So I should also explain that GPP is good participatory practice, and then there's more information about that on the AVAC website, as is, and I'm just going to reach over here for a second. We have a lot of literature on the current vaccine candidates, and you can actually download all this material. I guess I just wanted to end with saying that AVAC with IAVI and some other partners have published a paper in PLAWS 1 recently, which really looked at we have a lot of new prevention modalities. We have a ring perhaps coming, and but it looked at all the different. If we ramp up treatment and we get if we ramp up PrEP, if we ramp up VMC, there is still this modeling shows, and it's a paper in PLAWS 1, really shows that even if with all these modalities, we still need a vaccine to really end the epidemic. But if we had a vaccine, and they model it out, we could, in a best case scenario, perhaps reduce the number of new infections to below 100,000 in 2070. So it's still a vaccine is needed. So I'm going to thank both of the panelists. It's been a great talk, so thank you, and we really appreciate being able to share information about vaccines. And we'll see you at CROI 2017.